What's going on, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about top 12 wide receivers over on Underdog Fantasy. But before we get into it, if you guys could, go down, give this video a like. I'm answering every single comment. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to let me know down below. And subscribe to the channel. It is the #1 way to support me. It's completely free, and you could always change your mind later. It would mean the absolute world to me, guys. It's the #1 way to support me. Either way, let's hop right into it with our first player, and this should be no surprise to anyone who's followed fantasy football for any amount of time. It is, drum roll please, Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd, a great wide receiver, somebody who's averaged 800 yards over the last 3 seasons. I'm just kidding. It's Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson, a phenomenal wide receiver. One of the best wide receivers we've ever seen. Instead of wasting your time with just saying how great he is, I'm going to bring up some stats here. Justin Jefferson, in his first 3 seasons, not only was the best wide receiver of all time numbers-wise, but it wasn't even particularly close. He was one of only 3 wide receivers to have over 4,000 yards in his first 3 seasons, with the other 2 wide receivers being Randy Moss, who's okay, and Odell Beckham Jr., who was alright at that point in his career. He's ahead of Michael Thomas, Mike Evans by over 1,000 yards in only 3 seasons, and he's the only wide receiver to have over 4,500 yards in 3 seasons. He had 4,800 yards, a phenomenal first 3 seasons for Justin Jefferson. Not only that, his worst season was his rookie season, which was his worst season, but he still finished with 1,400 yards, placing him 3rd all time for the rookie receiving yard record, which again is absolutely crazy, only behind Ja'Marr Chase, who had an extra game. So Justin Jefferson, a phenomenal wide receiver. I do just want to bring up a couple of question marks, simply because Justin Jefferson is so good. It's really hard to knock. But the one thing you do have is Jordan Addison coming in, which I don't think will be bad for him at all. In fact, I think it could be pretty good for him. For one, it draws away double coverage, because Justin Jefferson is one of the few wide receivers in the NFL that is legitimately double covered on almost every single play, because Justin Jefferson is such a phenomenal talent. Justin Jefferson's target share is maxed out anyways. He's at 28%. I don't really see it going much higher, which is absolutely fine, considering he had 184 targets and 128 receptions this last season. This guy was on pace to break, potentially, the receiving record before Jay Alexander shut him down in the championship week. Either way, Justin Jefferson, a phenomenal wide receiver. The only other question mark I want to bring in is there have been some rumors regarding Kirk Cousins' long-term future with the Vikings, and I think it is possible that they do elect to bring in someone like Trey Lance, which would hinder Justin Jefferson's ceiling just a tiny bit. Not that much, but enough to where maybe you can make a case that he isn't the wide receiver 1, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. For now, Justin Jefferson, easily the wide receiver 1 in this year's draft. Either way, let's move on to my number 2 player, and that is Ja'Marr Chase. And again, no surprise here, Ja'Marr Chase, another phenomenal wide receiver. Somebody who, when I brought up the rookie receiving record, he was 2nd all time for receivers. The only person ahead of him did it in 1960. So another great wide receiver to add to your arsenal. You can't really go wrong. And he could have had another phenomenal season this year had he not gotten injured in week 8 of the NFL season, forcing him to miss 4 weeks. But as soon as he starts playing again, he comes back and obviously dominates, dropping 13, 23, and 15 points in his first 3 games back. Having 134 total targets is phenomenal, especially for missing time. 87 receptions and 9 touchdowns. This guy is above average in touchdown rate. 13 touchdowns his rookie season, 9 touchdowns in his second season, again, despite missing time. Ja'Marr Chase is going to get it done week in and week out for you, but also he provides you with a ceiling that few wide receivers have ever been able to attain. The only other wide receiver I can think of that has a ceiling like Ja'Marr Chase is Tyreek Hill. Both these guys can go out and drop 40 points, 50 points on any given week, which is crazy, and just automatically wins you your week, which you can't really be too mad about. Yeah, Ja'Marr Chase can bust a little bit on some weeks. I mean, you could point to 3 separate instances this season where he had less than 10 points, but right next to those, you have 28, 29 fantasy points, which, again, really helps you win your week. So if you want to go Ja'Marr Chase at 1, I understand it, but I just can't make a case for it right now. That's why I do have him in the 2nd tier of guys rather than this 1st tier. But again, Ja'Marr Chase, still a phenomenal player, and you cannot go wrong taking him. Either way, let's move on to my next two players, and I'm going to put them in the same tier. I've been debating between these two players a ton. I mean, you ask me today, it's Tyreek Hill. You ask me tomorrow, it's Cooper Kupp. But right now, I do have Tyreek Hill as my wide receiver 3. I think Tyreek Hill, another great player. I just brought him up before saying that he can have 50-point weeks, and that holds true. I mean, this is somebody who can have a 50-point showing over in fantasy football for half-point PPR scoring. He is a phenomenal wide receiver and should have had more touchdowns, I think, than he actually did this past season. Having only 7 touchdowns on 170 targets, he could easily have more touchdowns this next season, having 15 with Kansas City in 2020. Yeah, you do get a quarterback downgrade, but you also have Jaylen Waddle there drawing tons of coverage away from Tyreek Hill. And although Jaylen Waddle is in this offense, and I think we could see a little bit of a target reduction for Tyreek Hill in the long term, this is somebody who ranked 3rd in the entire NFL in terms of percentage of team targets with over 30%. One of only 4 players to do that. The other 3 were Cooper Kupp, Davante Adams, and Drake London. So pretty elite company to be in. I know Drake London kind of seems like an outlier there. Drake London, another elite guy. Either way, he also ranked 1st in yards per route run this past season with 3.42. To put it into perspective just how great that is and just how efficient that is, the only other wide receiver above 3 was Cooper Kupp, who only played 9 games and had 3.02 yards per route run. They are the only 2 wide receivers above 3 yards per route run. Justin Jefferson ranks at 2.71, just for a little bit more perspective, just to show just how dominant Tyreek Hill was this last season. Yeah, you could see a little reduction. He probably did hit his yards peak, his targets peak this last season. But again, we did see Skylar Thompson and Teddy Bridgewater stepping in for some games. So it is entirely possible that the best is yet to come for Tyreek Hill. And that's why he does land himself as my wide receiver 3. My wide receiver 4 is Cooper Kupp. And yeah, Cooper Kupp did deal with an injury last season that kept him out the second half of last season. And there is a question mark with Matt Stafford's arm, whether it is going to be 100% or not. I personally lean towards yes, but I'm not a doctor. Either way, Cooper Kupp, a phenomenal wide receiver and somebody who has elite chemistry with Matthew Stafford, averaging almost 11 targets a game this past season, 10.9 to be exact, which is almost exactly the same as his legendary Triple Crown season of 1,900 yards. So he still had the receptions, he still had the targets, almost exactly in line with what he did during his best season. The only real issue you could point to is the fact that he did regress a little bit from 114 yards per game to around 90 yards per game. But to me, that is absolutely fine, considering he was due for regression anyway. I mean, he just came off the best wide receiver season of all time. So I think Cooper Kupp is still going to be a phenomenal receiver and somebody I'm absolutely fine taking as my 4th wide receiver. Even my 3rd wide receiver, if you wanted to justify taking him over Tyreek Hill, you absolutely could. Like I said before, he had 3.02 yards per route run, which is one of only 2 wide receivers to do that. Again, the other being Tyreek Hill. I think he does resemble the end of a tier here. Either way, Cooper Kupp, a phenomenal wide receiver, somebody you should be taking everywhere if you have the 105. Moving on, we do have Stefon Diggs, and Stefon Diggs, just about one of the most consistent wide receivers you can ask for. Somebody who's averaged almost 1,400 yards the past 3 seasons, 1,396 to be exact. This is somebody who's gonna get it done in the touchdown department, being in one of the most elite offenses in the entire NFL, and we've seen that getting 10, 11, and 8 touchdowns over the past 3 years. Stefon Diggs can get it done. There really isn't much target competition. Yes, they do bring in Dalton Kincaid, but rookie tight ends seldom work out at the NFL level, so I'm not really too worried about him in the short term. Other than that, it's Gabe Davis, it's Khalil Shakir, who are not going to be taking serious volume away from Stefon Diggs. Josh Allen, an elite quarterback. You really can't ask for much more consistency than with Stefon Diggs. You know he's probably never going to be the wide receiver 1 eclipsing that 1,800 yard mark because he's never done it before in his 8-year career. But at the same time, Stefon Diggs, you really cannot go wrong taking him, and that's why I do have him as the wide receiver 5 here. I think Stefon Diggs, a great wide receiver, somebody you should be targeting in these drafts. Moving on, we do have A.J. Brown, and I was debating between A.J. Brown and this next guy a ton, because it is a little hard to differentiate between these people. I do have A.J. Brown here. I think A.J. Brown, a phenomenal wide receiver in his own right. Somebody who had almost 1,500 yards this last season, 1,496. We'll give him the nod for 1,500. That is insane. He's attached to a great quarterback who just led them to a Super Bowl. The only question mark you have with A.J. Brown is Devonta Smith potentially taking into some of his target share this next season, because I know A.J. Brown's an elite wide receiver. Don't get me wrong, A.J. Brown is one of the best wide receivers in the entire NFL, as he placed 3rd in the entire league in yards per out run with 2.96. Again, only behind Cooper Kupp and Tyreek Hill. My worry is that Devonta Smith may eat into some of this target share because right now A.J. Brown is averaging 29% of the team's targets, whereas Devonta Smith is averaging a little under 27%. So we could see more of an even split here. With Devonta Smith getting 136 targets this last season, we could honestly see that go up. And Devonta Smith did outperform A.J. Brown from a fantasy perspective over the second half of the season last season. But that is my main concern with A.J. Brown. That's why I do have him as the wide receiver 6. Either way, let's move on to the wide receiver 7. And that is Ceedee Lamb. And Ceedee Lamb, another great wide receiver. I know what you're probably thinking right now. Where the heck is Davante Adams? I will get to him in a second. I understand that he is a little bit low in this rankings. And if you disagree, feel free to let me know down below because I know Davante Adams is one of the most elite wide receivers in the NFL right now. But either way, Ceedee Lamb, a great wide receiver in his own right, somebody who averaged 1,350 yards this past season and did it without Dak Prescott at quarterback for 5 games, which is pretty substantial at the NFL level. Not only that, we did see Ceedee Lamb perform super well over the second half of the season when Dak was able to regain his footing post-injury. As from weeks 10 to 18, Ceedee Lamb finished as the wide receiver 3.5 point PPR scoring, only 7 points behind Justin Jefferson, and only 1 point behind Davante Adams, who again I will talk about in a second. And again, we saw it with Dak, how dominant Ceedee Lamb was, where Ceedee Lamb legitimately looked like a league winner during the second half of the season. So I'm fine taking Ceedee Lamb as my wide receiver 6, even as high as my wide receiver 5. I've been getting him almost everywhere over on Underdog Fantasy. Next up, I do want to talk about Davante Adams. And Davante Adams is a phenomenal player. Do not get me wrong. I love Davante Adams. I think he's one of the best route runners in the entire league, one of the best players in the entire league. And it shows in his advanced metrics, placing 6th in yards per route run, proving he did not lose a step this past season. And he commanded 32% of his team's target share, which ranked him first out of all wide receivers. He had 180 total targets, which, I mean, is just absolutely insane. My one worry is the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo is coming in as quarterback, which actually does concern me a little bit more than I think it does some other people. But I wanted to look back at his 2 full seasons and see his highest targeted player. In his 2019 season, his highest targeted player was George Kittle, who received 107 targets. And then in 2021, his second full season, the only player to receive over 100 targets was Deebo Samuel, who had 120 targets. So Jimmy Garoppolo is not the type of quarterback to hyper-target a wide receiver. Now, granted, he's never had a wide receiver at the level of Davante Adams, so maybe we see this change, but he's not like a Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, who hyper-targets the guys he loves. And so that's why we may see a little dip in production from Davante Adams this next season. Well, again, I still think Davante Adams is a phenomenal wide receiver, and we could see him finish with over 150 targets without a doubt in my mind. I am fine taking him at the 1-2 turn, but I personally do prefer Ceedee Lamb just a little bit. That's why I do have Ceedee Lamb right above him. Let's move on to my next player. It is Jaylen Waddle, and I already made an in-depth video about why you should be buying Jaylen Waddle over on Underdog Fantasy. You can check that out over here. But just to list off some basic things, Jaylen Waddle had over 1,350 yards this past season, despite the fact that Tyreek Hill was taking 30% of the team's target share and Tua was out for 4 games this season. When Tua was playing, Jaylen Waddle was almost on 1,500 yard pace, which is incredible at the wide receiver position. Jaylen Waddle, a great wide receiver, somebody you cannot go wrong with, and I think his target share could receive a bump up as well, because these other quarterbacks, the Teddy Bridgewaters, the Skylar Thompsons, were not targeting nearly as much as Tua was, simply because Tua's rapport with Jaylen Waddle is simply next level. That's why I do have Jaylen Waddle in a tier of his own. I think Jaylen Waddle is somebody you should absolutely be going out and targeting. Next up, I do have Garrett Wilson, and after some careful deliberation, I think that Garrett Wilson deserves to be in this tier with Jaylen Waddle. Garrett Wilson, a phenomenal wide receiver in his own right, somebody who was dealing with the absolute worst quarterback play in the entire NFL. I mean, you had Zach Wilson ranking bottom 5 in terms of QBR. You have Zach Wilson grading out last as a PFF quarterback, 48 out of 48. Zach Wilson was a terrible quarterback. Mike White, I love the story. Not a good quarterback either. He was a fun play, but that's really about it. Joe Flacco is washed to this point in his career, so I think Garrett Wilson was dealing with some of the worst quarterback play. And now he comes in this next season getting Aaron Rodgers, a top 5 quarterback of all time, somebody who won MVP 2 of his last 3 seasons. And well, there are question marks as to whether the wheels are starting to fall off for Aaron Rodgers. He did have his worst statistical season of his career. The odds that Aaron Rodgers is now done is possible, but it's certainly worth a risk on Garrett Wilson. The problem is his ADP, where right now he is coming off right in between Ceedee Lamb and Amon Ra St. Brown ahead of Jaylen Waddle. And I just personally cannot get behind that. Personally, what I'm doing usually at the 1-2 turn is I'm taking Ceedee Lamb and then one of those elite running backs, whether it be Saquon Barkley, whether it be Austin Eckler. I'm going after one of those elite guys after I get my elite wide receiver. And the problem is Garrett Wilson could easily take a step up and be a 1,500-yard wide receiver. We just haven't seen it yet from him, and that's why I am a little bit concerned. But at the same time, if you are pulling trigger on Garrett Wilson, I am fine with that. He could easily have a breakout and finish as a top 3 wide receiver this season. He could be the number 1 wide receiver. That's how talented he is. He finished his rookie season with over 2 yards per route run, which is a very indicative metric of success in the future. He also commanded 25% of his team's target share as a first-year rookie. So this is a great wide receiver, somebody you cannot go wrong taking. I just can't do it. As I said before, I would rather have these elite running backs. Either way, let's move on to my next wide receiver, and that is Chris Olave. I think Chris Olave had a very under-the-radar rookie season. He was a great rookie, and yet he's being drafted at the 2-3 turn, despite having arguably just as good, if not better, of a rookie season than Garrett Wilson. I mean, this is somebody who had over 1,000 yards despite missing 2 games. And furthermore, Derek Carr is the type of quarterback to go in and hyper-target these wide receivers. As I mentioned before with Davante Adams, this is somebody who could legitimately pepper Chris Olave with 170 targets this next season. Chris Olave is a deep bomb threat, somebody who wins with the deep ball, but he can also win all over the field. You really can't go wrong taking Chris Olave here. I think he's somebody who is a phenomenal talent, and year 2 wide receivers generally do take steps up from their year 1 selves. The quarterback is an upgrade. The wide receiver room is still pretty desolate. We have question marks surrounding Michael Thomas, and other than that, it's Rashid Shaheed. I think Chris Olave finds himself in a great situation, and I am absolutely fine taking him here. I do put him a tier below Garrett Wilson, but still a great wide receiver nonetheless. On my last wide receiver, it's somebody you guys have probably been waiting for. It is Amon Ra St. Brown. And I know Amon Ra St. Brown is a phenomenal player. This is somebody who had over 1,100 yards this past season, despite missing time in a game and playing 2 games pretty banged up where he only received a small portion of the snaps. And I really don't have a problem if you want to take Amon Ra St. Brown higher than this. I just can't do it because I think the upside of these other wide receivers around him are just simply higher. And in these underdog best ball drafts, I am just trying to swing for the fences here. And while Amon Ra St. Brown could finish with 1,400 yards this season, I would not put it past him in the slightest. I mean, he could have easily done it this last season had he not dealt with injuries. I would just rather have the guys who could legitimately finish with 1,600 yards here. I would rather take the guys with higher short-term upside here, and that's why I am taking Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave over him. But again, if you want to have Amon Ra St. Brown ahead of these guys, I am absolutely fine with it. Either way, that's going to be it for the video. Hope you did enjoy, and if you did, go smash that like button, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is the #1 way to support me. Thank you guys all so much, and I hope you have a good day, a good night, and a good life.